On the Healthy Human Revolution podcast, Dr. Laurie Marbas interviews nutrition and lifestyle medicine experts and extraordinary guests whose informative and inspiring stories will empower you with the knowledge to transform your life and health.
Welcome to the podcast. I'm Dr. Laurie Marbas, and today I have a very special, not only incredible person, but I've got to know as a physician, patient, and she was kind enough to share her incredible story. Miss Jamie Reno, how are you today?
I'm good. I'm good, Dr. Marbas.
Oh, you call me Laurie, please. So the really cool thing is about your story is that you've overcome so much, and I feel like that's where you're going to resonate with so many people. And I'm just really tickled for people to hear your story. But can we just go back to when it began, right? So you overcame weight loss and some other things and food addiction and all that. I just, people want to pry into the minds of people who've been successful and what they're doing. But I really think it's important to understand the origin story and like kind of what led down that path, if you don't mind.
Sure. I like to say that I was a food addict probably from birth. Mm-hmm. I always struggled with weight and obesity, even as a young child, a toddler and beyond. I found, food, I sought food for comfort all the time, so much so that even while I was nursing up through my toddlerhood phase, my mother's pediatrician, for me, had her start wearing jumpers so that I could not get on to nurse. Wow. And it was that, so I was seeking food for comfort at a very, very young age. And that, of course, says a lot about, the childhood dynamics, but it also says a lot about, what I found, as my place to go, right, was food. So those behaviors that started as an infant and a toddler, they led me all the way through my childhood, right? So I would eat for comfort. I would eat for happiness. I would eat for sadness. Food was my best friend in a lot of ways. Even though I was very social and very gregarious and very outgoing, food was my solace. And so I wore the obesity. And I lived that journey, and as I grew up, my weight grew with me. And so I really just, food was so much a part of my life and my family's life and the culture that I was part of. And I am still part of, growing up Italian, food is a lot of family celebrations and family connection. And it's also a place to pour yourself into, right? To pour yourself into the food that you serve and that you give to others. And so I grew up in a family of foodies, and I became that. And so I was blessed with really the genes that predisposed me to obesity. They are in my family on one side of my family. But I was the only person in my family other than my mom who had this struggle with obesity and struggle with weight. All the other family members at that time that I was growing up, everyone else was sort of a normal weight. So I stood out in so many ways. And when you stand out that way, especially as a child, people, well-meaning adults or doctors will try to get you to change behavior. They'll point things out. And it just was always so sensitive. And whatever I would hear, whenever they would, no matter how lovingly they said it to me, it would just send me right back into the food. So, so much of what I learned as a child was just the way I would respond to the way food was marketed to me, the way food, was used in family settings or in school functions or, in the world in general. And, it just became, even though, again, I was outgoing and I had friends and I had a social life and I did well in school, food was still a driver in my life. And my obesity, kept growing as I grew up. And I was, severely obese and morbidly obese by the time I was in my teens and well into my 20s and beyond. So yeah, that's how it kind of grew up with me.
So you have a lot of points there. I feel like we could 1 hour conversations alone, right? is the environment. I guess I'd like to really kind of hone in on that, because, infants and toddlers, they choose to eat because there's an internal hunger drive, right? They're intuitive to their hunger. So as you were growing up, were there a lot of processed foods and other things available in the home that were actually, more of a factor versus, no offense to your doctor, whoever that was, but nursing infants is normal to hungry. I mean, that's just babies. They eat, poop, and sleep. I mean, this is what they do.
Right.
And so almost it makes me interesting but it's that solace and comfort of the mother being close to the infant. That's probably what you associate with the food. And that's normal, right? That's what you want to build that attachment. But as you grew out of that into, older toddlerhood and to growing into school, what were the food dynamics or food choices in the home that you kind of alluded to a little bit later?
Good question. They were highly processed foods. I was born in the mid 70s. So for me, we were right on the cusp of when you had a lot of processed and packaged foods and that whole explosion of the processed food industry, where big tobacco had moved into big food. And I was a child, late 60s, early 70s was when it started. Here I was in the mid 70s and early 80s, where I was a kid and I was exposed to all the processed food commercials and cues and all of the packaged and processed, everything was new and interesting and like the bright, shiny objects, right? So we would go to grocery stores, and I remember I would see the commercial for a cereal, and then I would go and ask my mom to buy that cereal. I would seek it in the grocery store. I would meet my cereal friends on Saturday mornings, and I would sit there with my bowl and just keep eating the sugary cereal. I was sort of in an environment in my home that was, the dynamics were not great growing up, which of course is, I'm sure, what sent me into that comfort seeking as an infant and toddler. But then as I grew up and the dynamics in the home calmed down, I was already hooked. I was already hooked on the sugars and already hooked on the processed foods. And none of us understood what was happening in the world with these foods and how toxic they were and how easy it was to gain weight while eating them. So I would seek them, and I would eagerly be marketed to. You know what I'm saying? I would absorb it all. And my mom was going back to work at that time. So it was just this whole perfect storm where she relied on the convenience foods. She was a single mom. We were, growing up and kind of going out in the world and doing our own thing and coming home after school with freedom there. And then we were being marketed to, and processed foods were being pushed on us and pushed on us in a way that is, hey, this is new. No one's ever had this before. You can make instant whatever and anything you want out of a box and anything you want out of a bag. And, all of these new processed foods were like a whole new world. So my environment internally was primed, and my environment externally was just, it was available everywhere.
I like how you said that your environment internally was primed, and then it's easy when the external environment is feeding into what you're already susceptible to. But kind of getting to, one thing that I've really taken an interest to, I listened to a book called The Body Keeps Score. And it's about yes, oh my gosh, it's about childhood adverse events and PTSD and other negative things that occur in, early childhood, but also into adulthood that really impact people in a subconscious level, where we're making decisions and our body's responding before we even can think about what's going on, right? It's that going to the refrigerator or in eating something when you see a stressful email, or, you're bored and you go and eat something. It's all these different things that set us up for these habits, but we're in the environment, right? If all we had was healthy foods in our environment, I'd be out of a job, and right? But it just kind of speaks to the human condition of all the stressors and everything that we put ourselves under. And then we set ourselves up when this, like you said, toxic food environment. And food addiction is so under discussed and not even recognized as an entity, because I feel there's a lot of powers to be that would say, we can't say that because that would put people's, pockets in danger, big corporations. And so there's always this nudge against us, but there's, the internal nudge. People are tired of feeling sick and tired of not feeling well. But those adverse child events, it actually prompted me in our, new patient intake form there's an ACE score sheet. And so it really gives me a lot of insight, because I was seeing patients who would have a success to a degree, and then something would happen and they'd fall right back into it. And I couldn't figure it out. And so then as I was listening to this book, I was like, oh my goodness, it makes so much more sense. Yes. We need to be better attuned as to what this person grew up in and what's going on inside the mind as part of the behavior change. It's not just the environment now. It's not me just telling you implement these habits or set yourself up for success. There's a thinking process that's occurring, a change in the conversation internally that has to occur. So I feel like that's kind of where you are, but I'd like to know, to what severity did the obesity and other health issues occur for you? Like, can you walk us through the painful aspect of that so that we can really celebrate how well you've done? I mean, it's just incredible.
Oh, sure. So I will say one thing about Body Keeps the Score, and that that autonomic response that we have. I noticed it must have been 2000, maybe 2007 or 8. I was not in recovery from food addiction yet, but I was starting to, of course, see the behaviors, right? And I knew that there was a problem, and I didn't know how deep it was. I had a really stressful phone call. I hung up the phone with the person I was talking to. I immediately turned around and walked right to the pantry and opened the door. And that was the first time in my entire life that I was like, oh, there's a relation here. I'm not even hungry. By the way, I didn't really even know what hunger was at the time, but I knew my stomach wasn't growling. And I knew that I had just eaten a meal an hour earlier. Right. And so that's when I realized, and yeah, it's so fascinating. I had gotten to the point, I lost my mom suddenly in 2004. Unfortunately, as a result, her death was a byproduct of her processed food addiction. She died of acute pancreatitis related to a secondary infection from bronchitis, and her immune system was so compromised that the secondary infection was able to take hold and kind of travel. And she was sick all the time with different things. She was a teacher and caught lots of things. So my addiction and my obesity just ramped up in a huge way. I had falsely managed my weight around 200 pounds for a few years, but I was using diet pills. And once I got off the diet pills, I sort of white knuckled it for a while. And then once I lost my mom, I gained, over the next 4 or 5 years, I gained probably 200 pounds. And it took work, right? It was, I was actively eating to squelch the grief, squelch the emotion. And I think now I look back on that period of time, I could not find scales to weigh myself. I was over the limit of any scale, doctor's offices included. I would walk outside and at a gas station or a supermarket or something out in the public, and I would get ridiculed by strangers. They just would, say things to me, unsolicited, cruel observations about the way I looked or the way I was walking or the way I was, what I was buying. Of course, if there was food in my hand or in my grocery cart, there was a comment from strangers. I flew a lot for work. And that was just, as you can imagine, extremely uncomfortable in every way, physically, emotionally, mentally. I lost jobs because of my size and my ability to perform on the job. My food addiction was, in an extremely severe place. So I thought that I had some learning disabilities going on as an adult, right? I thought I had some adult learning disabilities. I had always done well in school, but as my addiction progressed and I was eating more of these processed foods and using them to sort of really, harm myself by this point, I was starting to see all those effects intellectually, emotionally. I was very dysregulated. Physically, of course, I could not speak in front of a group of people to present anything without getting totally winded. Walking, anything was a chore. I was pre-diabetic. I was told I was pre-diabetic. That was about 2007. And I didn't understand back then that that was really just non-insulin dependent diabetes. And then I was going to very quickly be insulin dependent. I didn't understand that. I wasn't told that. There was never a discussion with the doctor at that point about food at all, or weight or anything. It was simply just here's your blood sugar. You're pre-diabetic. You need to consider weight loss in general, but there was nothing specific. And then I had a scare with my heart, where I was starting to have panic attacks and all kinds of other mental illness related issues around panic disorder, anxiety, depression, which makes sense what we know now about processed food addiction and the effects of these foods, right? It can trigger all these anxiety and depression responses. And so when I had one of these panic attacks, they monitored me in the hospital, thought they saw something in one of my, when they were monitoring my heart. And they said, oh, you've got is it ejection fraction?
Ejection fraction in heart failure.
They said that there's something going on there. Your percentage isn't right. We're going to do a cardiac cath. And I thought, okay, I was 400+ pounds. They came in, they were very concerned. They did the catheterization and they said, no, your heart's fine. And I thought, okay, I've taken these, a few years of diet pills. I'm 400+ pounds. Like that was it. That was just like, okay, this is a huge wake up call. I had just earlier that year been in for sleep apnea testing. I mean, I was young. I was in my early to mid 30s. And I woke up one day right after that cardiac situation. And I thought, I'm not going to make it to 40. Like if I don't do something, I'm not going to live till 40. And of course, there's bigger existential questions, right? Do I want to live till 40, right? You know what I mean? Like what's going on in my world that I'm doing this to myself? Right. But I really, of course I did, right? I do, I do love life. And I believe that there was more for me to do. And so I considered surgery. And for me, the bariatric surgery route was absolutely not an option, because once I understood the way they alter our physiology, I thought, no, that seems so wrong. And it didn't make sense, because it felt like you were changing your physiology but not changing any of the mental or psychological processes. And that didn't seem like it was sustainable. And, from what I understand now, I was on the right track to avoid it, but I was desperate. I knew I couldn't go back and take diet pills. I had gotten, the get out of jail free card from the cardiologist. And I thought, I'm not going down that path. I have to do this, and I have to learn how to do it. And I have to do it the all natural way, the non-quick fix, the non-shortcut way. And so I began going to therapy, and that made me want to learn how to take care of myself. And I began going to a dietitian who gave me so many tools that I desperately needed at the time. She was a wonderful resource for many years for me in so many ways, as was my counselor, just amazing. But until I took the processed foods completely out, I did not see true mental, emotional, and physical healing until they were out.
Wow. What were some of the tools that they worked with you outside of, of course, removing the processed foods? Was there anything that stood out that was very, very helpful?
Yeah, I would say, my dietitian talking about, when I walked into her office in 2009, I had no idea what a normal portion looked like. I had no idea what hunger felt like. I had no idea what satiety felt like. I knew what stuffed and numb and almost food comatose felt like. Wow. Really. I was using food in ways that, not every meal, but there were meals when I would just end the sort of food coma, and it was almost, it was almost welcomed. And there were other meals where I would, act like I was a normal eater, and I would eat just like everyone else. And then of course, go home and eat the way I wanted to eat. And so some of the tools they gave me were around not only portion sizes and ordering help, but also cognitive behavioral therapy. And, you know, my counselor helped me understand that my brain, because of childhood events, my brain had developed differently. And I wish, you know, I was reflecting on it this week. I wish that she had said right after that statement, I wish that she had said, and we can rewire it. Because now, you know we can, right? Back in 2009, I heard that and I thought, well, I'm broken. You know what I mean? I've got this weird brain that no one else has, and this body. And, you know, and she didn't, of course, had she thought it through, I'm sure she never would have said it that way, or she would have added to it. But it was really actually a big pivot point for me to say, okay, there is something wrong. Like my brain didn't develop the way that other kids' brains without my experiences developed. And it does predispose me to this addiction. She also didn't explain that part of it, because she wasn't looking at food as an addiction. Here she was looking at a patient or a client, 400+ pounds, you know, but because we don't talk about food as an addiction, processed food as an addiction, she wasn't treating me as an addict in recovery. And I think that was a missing piece for her and me. And I also didn't, until my dietitian started to help me see the link between my food behaviors and my emotions, did I start to realize that I was an addict, you know, as much as an alcoholic or a drug addict, in the way I would behave around food, the way I would isolate, you know, when it came to food, the way I would, was in denial about my food behaviors, or the cravings I had. It was really just so interesting. And again, she's the ADA paradigm, right? She's part of the ADA world. So she was trying to help me moderate processed foods the whole time. And I just couldn't do it.
Yeah, they were saying moderation and everything. And I, like you and I would agree that moderation kills, right? Because you never get you well. So I want to go back to that realization of the food addiction, right? Because you're early in the mid 2000s, like, and even now the word food addiction is still batted around, and people don't really hone in and understand the severity of what we're dealing with here. I'm seeing it on a day-to-day basis. You dealt with it day-to-day in your own life. What was the mindset? Because I feel like some people are just like, I'm just a food addict, it's the way it is, I give up. Others, like yourself, take it and own it. How did you process that? Did it become part of your identity? What was that clicking going on in the brain that allowed you to have a different outcome?
You know, I grew up in a family with alcoholism, and right, you know, so much of what we know now as children growing up in those environments, I could have easily been an alcoholic. I just liked brownies way more. And so when I look at the behaviors of alcoholics, the behaviors and the mindsets of, you know, in alcoholism, I have all of those. My drug is food. And so, or, you know, the food ingredients. So when I first heard that there was such a thing, I first heard about it from Dr. Joanna Fland and some of her research in processed food addiction recovery, as well as Chef AJ. And this was back in 2017. And I remember they talked about withdrawal and how you would get, you know, maybe enraged if you were in food withdrawal. And I looked up, I was sitting in my slimmer body. I had maintained my weight loss for 5, 6, 7 years by that point. I'd lost 200 pounds. I was feeling good. And I thought, oh wait, I used to rage all the time in between meals. Like I used to be so emotionally unhinged about silly things, you know, nothing major, but silly life things would come my way and I couldn't handle them. And I put my head up and I go, that sounds like an addict who's in withdrawal from their drug. And of course that was the whole premise, right? And I thought, oh my gosh, like it's not hypoglycemia, like, oh, this is hypoglycemia, it runs in our family, and oh, don't get her hangry. No, this is an addict in withdrawal from their drug. And then I just threw myself into the research, and of course my frontal lobe was coming back online because I was removing more and more processed foods. By that point, I understood what they were doing to my mood. And then of course, once I pulled more and more out, against my dietitian's wishes, by the way. She said, you're being too strict. You're being too black and white. You're being too, too much. You're doing too much. You don't have to do all that. And I said, no, I can't moderate these. I can't just have one. And when I do, I'm consumed with thoughts of them.
Yes.
And
yes.
so I went against her wishes, and I wished her well, and I love her dearly, but she is not traveling the road with me anymore. Mm-hmm. And so I knew that recovery meant abstinence, mm-hmm. and I grieved it. I grieved, and I was angry when I heard that word. I was angry. Mm-hmm. I thought, I'm not an addict. I'm not an addict like this member of my family. I'm not that way. That's not me. And I was angry and resentful and scared. And then I thought, okay, well, there's science here. Like, well, let me understand the why, right? I'm all about the why. What's the why? And when I began to understand the science, and I could see myself in all of the research, and then Joan Iflin started to interview me as part of her research, I thought, and I thought, gosh, this is me. This is my story. And I have the opportunity of, as many of my peers do, to help people remove the shame. Like, this is not our fault. This is readily given to us by the processed food industry, readily given to us by setting us up internally with our adverse childhood events that put us in a place to be addicts in some capacity, potentially. Mm-hmm. And then you go into a heavily processed food rich environment, and it's everywhere. It's everywhere. It's in media. It's everywhere the minute we leave our homes, if it's not already everywhere in our homes.
Oh my goodness, there's so much. You're amazing. So this is why, guys, I wanted you to listen to Jamie's story, because it's just a delight to listen to. You're so well spoken. You speak everything from the heart and transparency. I love it. Amazing. Can we go back to the doctor's name that you mentioned? Because I feel like people are going to be tuning into, like, who's that? What's that? Can you give us a little bit of information about that?
So Dr. Joan Ifland is, she
How do you spell that? Joan, they'll ask.
I F as in Frank, LAND. Mm-hmm. And her first name is Joan. And she literally wrote the book on processed food addiction. She wrote the textbook on processed food addiction. She's a PhD, Stanford undergrad PhD, who is not only on her own recovery journey from processed food addiction, but was able to develop not only an assessment that, is similar to other processed food addiction assessments we've seen and other addiction assessments we've seen, but it helps you understand the severity, right, of processed food addiction. And she is absolutely committed to helping people understand that addiction is, to processed foods is absolutely real. It is insidious, and it is, based on her research, it is in many, many ways more serious than drug and alcohol addiction, because it is multiple substances. And there are multiple pathways in our brains that are activated when we eat these foods, because we've got sugar, fat, salt, and other additives that are triggering these pathways. And cocaine only triggers one pathway. Alcohol only triggers one pathway. Heroin, one pathway. With processed foods, there's multiple. So if you're dopamine deficient and you've got processed foods in your system, you're lighting up 3-4 pathways. And every time we encounter stress and our stress pathways ignite, that addiction is primed and ready.
Well, and outside of alcohol and drugs, those aren't readily available or acceptable, right. But processed food is, right? And we give it to our kids.
That's right. And like I said, it's everywhere in our home. It's everywhere in our media. It's everywhere in society. And it's encouraged everywhere in society, because we are all addicts living among other addicts.
Right. And we don't want to admit
no,
what's going on. It goes from the Girl Scout cookies to, you know, Super Bowl commercials for Doritos to, you know, whatever. And it is literally accepted. And then when patients or people start making different decisions, we're looked out and outcasted because we're like, oh, the healthy one, why can't I have this and do that too? And then we're dealing, like you said, with these addicts, and they're arguing with you about what their behavior is okay because it's accepted in society.
Yeah.
So
encouraged.
Exactly. So tell us, what was your highest weight that you're aware of and how much weight you've lost? And now what do you do on a day-to-day to maintenance and what you eat? Because those are the other questions I'm sure I'm going to get. So share your wisdom, please.
Like I said earlier, I could not find scales at my highest to weigh me. Not like I was looking for them, right? I was eager to see the number. I cruised well past, a couple of sizes past my 400-pound mark, right, where the scales were weighing me. So I probably was in the, you know, the 4 to 430 range. And I don't weigh myself today. I have clothing that I use as sort of barometers to make sure that I'm holding where I need to hold steady. Last time I weighed myself, I was, you know, 250 pounds below where I started. Wow. And so I lost 200 of it between 2009 and 2013. And then I went into this sort of white knuckle, dry drunk phase of food addiction, 2013 to 17. And then in 17, I started to pull out the processed foods. And then in 2019 went plant-based and never looked back. Found my equilibrium in every way. My frontal lobe was back online. I was able to critically think again on a regular basis. And I just felt out of congruency with my values to eat animal products. And once I learned the science behind, especially what dairy can do to us and the byproducts of animal, you know, meats, I just thought, yeah, that's an easy decision. So I went whole food plant-based, and then my, you know, I feel amazing. I eat, really, I don't weigh and measure anything anymore. That unfortunately was a trigger for me. And that's what I love about this way of eating. I don't have to weigh and measure. I have to look at not only the order of the foods I eat, but the way that I make up my plate. And that's all I need to know. So I'll eat, you know, lots of big bowls of greens and beans and quinoa for breakfast with a big smoothie, and lunch is a big salad with sweet potato and some other raw veggies, you know, raw other than my sweet potato. And then my dinners will be cooked vegetables, some squashes. I'm getting into some of these, you know, carefully getting into making some of these, you know, potato-based cheese sauces and other things, just trying to spice up my foods. And that's a sometimes food. That's not an always food, but I'm enjoying, you know, figuring out how to make some of those whole plant-based versions of those foods. Not really for me, but my husband is a big fan of Tex-Mex and all of those. We live in Texas, so trying to translate healthier versions of Tex-Mex foods, he's grateful for that, for me trying those things. And I eat fruit and I enjoy it. And you know, my drink is water or maybe some herbal tea if I'm really feeling like it, but that's it. And it takes discipline and effort to prepare. So every week I'm preparing, you know, my ingredients for the week, cooking and cutting up different starches and vegetables, and getting those ready for me to kind of use throughout the week. It's about a 3-hour process, and it's worth every minute, because then throughout the week, it's very quick for me to do what I have to do with food. And every day I wake up in the morning and I do some form of movement. Sometimes it's intense, sometimes it's more of a recovery kind of day, but it's spinning on the Peloton, it's walking on the treadmill or outside, it's, you know, some yoga stretching, it's, you know, foam rolling. I have a journaling practice and I have a meditation practice, and I've been doing a lot of coherent breathing work lately, which has been super fun. And I'm just really enjoying keeping my frontal lobe back online, and I'm enjoying, all the anxiety, the depression, the moodiness, the irritability, the raging, gone. I work with a counselor here and there if there's some things I need to figure out in life. But there's so much when the food is gone, there's so much clarity, peace, and serenity that comes from living this way, that I see clearly answers, like they say in the AA world, like, you see clearly what answers you need to get without really knowing, why you know them, you just know them. Mm. So I experience that. And I also make sure that I guard my media environment and my social media world. I don't really have too much of a media presence, and I don't like to consume, mainstream media much at all. I fiercely guard and protect my stress pathways as much as I can, because I know that no matter how good my food is, if they get ignited over time with a lot of cues and a lot of, sort of beating on my stress pathways, I might not go face first into a box of donuts anymore, but I don't need the food monkey on my back. So I think if I, in addition to food prep and movement, I would say, the way I guard my environment is the other big indicator of my success.
I think that's fabulous, right? You're speaking to all the elements that someone would need to live a life, right? You're when you fed your body well, so you're getting the output of what's your input, which is amazing. You're moving your body, which allows you probably to rest and sleep and do better there. And then finally, you're exactly right? You are taking control of what you allow the input into our brains versus just, bouncing to wherever, someone throws you here, someone throws you there. And social media is a big one. And honestly, I would be tickled if I didn't have to do any social media, but that is not the life that I've chosen, unfortunately. Presence on an online, family doing telehealth stuff. But I also think it's important that people hear other stories like yourselves, because there's so many nuggets here that you gave today that I think, geez, I can't imagine someone not walking away from this having more knowledge and more wisdom than they had before. I mean, like I said, you're just so well spoken in how you share your story and then delineate that to here's what works, right? This is what you do. And I think that's fabulous, man. If I'd had this conversation when I first started plant-based cell, even 6 years ago when I started the podcast, it would have been like, whoa, there's so many things here. I need to go, right? Because I really think, you think I'm kidding. I'm not. I really think so many physicians, if they had the intuition that you have learned through your own experience and able to speak the words that you just did to their patients, we'd be living in a very different world right now.
Yeah. And a lot of this I credit with Dr. Iflin's research, my own, experience, really seeing myself in the research. And again, this wasn't necessarily, she does a lot of research, but she cultivated and curated it and pulled it together and told the story of processed food addiction and the way it shows up in the brain and body. And what I love is I'm part of a community called the Addiction Reset community that focuses all on food addiction. And, so much of what we know now about addiction recovery is in community, right? And a huge reason for my success is also, in addition to everything I just said, is the time I spend in community. And the community I'm part of is all virtual. It's incredible. It's filled with processed food addicts of all different varieties from all over the world. And we support each other in recovering from the addiction, not only in the brain, not only in the body, but in relationships, in finances. I mean, processed food addiction affects every aspect. It affected every aspect of my life. I lost jobs. I had, financial issues. I, of course, had relationship issues. I went through a divorce. I mean, it was textbook addiction, in action. And to recover from that and have these areas of my wheel, my life wheel, right, that are coming back online, and having over the last few years, having, vibrant, full life in all of these different areas, and wanting more, right? Wanting to have more improvement and more realization and more recovery and helping others see what's possible is what gets me excited about talking to you. And I want to say one other thing, you know, years ago when I was given the diagnosis of, hey, you know, you're pre-diabetes and something's wrong with your heart and sleep apnea and all these, you know, blood pressure and all these things. I was so, you know, just so sick and had so many of these markers for chronic disease. And then meeting you, right, working with you, we go through all of our testing and we do all of our work together. And you sit there and you tell me, like, I'll never forget, you said to me, you're going to live forever. Like, look at your numbers, look at your results, and look at your, you know, you're so insulin sensitive. You're so, you know, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. And after what I've put myself through and been a, you know, sort of a victim of in the world with the food addiction, to hear you say what you said and to know that I've given myself health and a life back is just such a gift. And I'm so grateful to you.
Oh, I'm just the deliverer of the message that you cultivated. That was simple. Like, you did all the hard work. I just get to deliver you, saying from the standpoint of a physician looking at this going, holy mackerel, this is incredible. And I will tell you right now, Jamie, you were by far one of my favorite interviews ever.
Oh, thank you.
And so I can't even tell you. And I hope that people please share this, because it goes beyond even the food addiction, but just how someone is present in their mind to say, you know, I don't have to keep making these decisions and having these outcomes in my life, right? You have the ability to chart a new way, a new journey, and end up in a new place. And you're a perfect, beautiful example inside and out of this, exactly what we all need to be doing in our lives. And I just love every minute detail of it. It's amazing. So I'm just so excited that people can listen to this and have this available to share with others, because the fun part about this is that your story will be shared and you'll never know all the amazing ripple effects that you're having on others. And goodness gracious, I hope, please, everyone, please flake these words. I just can't even tell you, after decades and decades of a physician, I'm telling you, these are the people that can really make a difference. And please share her story. So thank you for coming on board and letting me, you know, ask you these questions and being so thoughtful and sharing them, because I just, it's people like you that are open and being vulnerable and sharing that, yeah, I struggled and this is where I was and this is where I'm at now. And you can come too, you know, come join us in this crazy green pasture of plants and
it's amazing.
Addiction recovery, right? You know, there's so much more than the food though that you did. You removed the inflammatory side of things, which allowed you, like you said, your frontal lobe to come online and really understand what's going on. But you were listening to yourself and you had to re-speak and change the talk that was going. You had to change your software, and that was amazing.
Yeah, neuroplasticity is amazing. And the one thing I want to say, I just want to close a loop on something. When I walked into my dietitian's office in 08, 09, I started working with her. I didn't know what hunger felt like. I didn't know what true physiological hunger felt like, because I was afraid to let myself feel it. And I was afraid it would consume me. And so just this latest phase of my recovery in the last year, have I started to really understand and let myself get hungry. And you and I have talked about that, right?
Yep.
Like how I've had to let myself feel hunger. And the beautiful thing is, and I do love Dr. Furman talking about, you know, hunger is the best sauce. And as, you know, as a recovering addict, that's dicey, right? Because our pendulums can swing in extremes. But once I knew that I was grounded in my recovery and I was really good at listening to my body's cues on satiety, I thought, let's take this hunger thing for a spin. And now I do. And it's just exquisite. Like when our bodies are they tell us everything we need to know. And it is so cool to let myself get hungry over, you know, a couple hours it takes, you know, from the time the blood sugar starts to drop until I actually feel the physical hunger. And it's like a fun little journey. And I remind myself my food is going to taste so good when I eat. And it's, you know, and I'll know when I'm ready. And it's just, that's been the latest part of my recovery that is closed, that another loop, right, in my life where I trust my body to tell me what it needs and what it doesn't need now. And after years of not even wanting anything to do with my body, that is just also such a gift.
No, wow. So, so much more we could talk about.
Sorry.
No, I think it's beautiful. You're describing what I really honing in on. There's so much when it comes to like behavior economics and building your environment to make better decisions, but it all comes back to trust in yourself, intuitive feeding. Some people say, oh, there's no bad foods, there's no good foods, you just listen to your body and eat when you're hungry. But the thing is, yes, first of all, there are bad foods, or we wouldn't have the chronic disease we have. Number two, people don't understand what you've been in this cycle of recovery for so many years, and you're just now saying that you truly appreciate and can understand true hunger when it was removed from you, not I'm sure not intentionally, in the sense of your parents feeding you processed foods, but they took away that intuitive we're hardwired to know when we're hungry, right? And as small children, that is removed from us. And unless you grow up in an environment, well, for me, for example, I also grew up in a very dysfunctional home. When you look at my ACE score, it's like 6. It's ridiculous.
Girl, I get it.
And yeah, and I haven't been in contact with my immediate, my parents or my sister for 6+ years. And there's a reason for that. And
right.
But we lived in such a poor home, meaning no dollars, that, even like square toilet paper were rationed. Like they were literally yelling at kids, like, you're using too much. I mean, it got to that degree that my parents were like, we grow our food and we buy what's ever cheap, which was in the produce aisle. It was the beans, dried beans. And so honestly, that was my only saving grace, because for me, my addiction, because I knew that my only way out of the life I was living was school. And I became almost an addict to perfection in my grades. Like it was stressful to me to get anything less than an A. And to the point that, it became very unhealthy. Yeah, completely. But that was I didn't have access to the processed food. So I'm pretty sure, and they didn't have alcohol in the home, or there probably would have been, plus I had friends who drank and destroyed their lives. But, we all have it. It could be food. It's going to be spending. It's going to be, overworking. It's going to be, exactly. So, there's so many things that we set up ourselves to not be in a healthy space. But the nice thing about what you've done is that you've removed the elements that made you ill, but now you also understand you're also still at risk, right? Like you said, you're putting yourself in this safe place, and you guard it because your health depends on being constantly proactive in your health. There's so many beautiful things that you're doing in your life. So I was like, I wish, we should just write a book, Jamie. I was going to write Jamie Reno's book on how to get your butt in gear and get healthy.
I've been asked, I've been told that more than once.
Well, I think you would do wonders, because if it's anything like You Can Speak, I can only imagine it would be a bestseller right out the gate. And definitely, I know you had mentioned Dr. Ifland, and I've looked at her stuff, and it looks really fascinating because she's been doing this. She's older, right? She's like in her 70s, I'm guessing, at this point.
Early 70s, yeah.
Yeah. And so she's definitely, and she was probably the voice that people like, you're crazy, food addiction, like, wow. I mean, she must have definitely fought the tide, kind of like the Esselstyns of the food plant-based world, right?
She still is. And I love that Chef AJ sees her value and has her on and interviews her and uses her parts of her summit and other things.
Yeah.
And as does Robert Lustig on the other side of the world. And so, she gets a lot of attention from the low carb and the plant-based world. But she also, she's cultivated this amazing community of recovering food addicts that is we're fiercely protective and supportive of each other. and we're fiercely inclusive of each other. And it has made all the difference on the community side, because I can do what I can do in my environment and my food and all the mindset and psychology. But man, if I don't have that community of people that I feel like I can show up as my authentic self and they love and support me, no matter what.
With your warts and all. Those are jewels to be held close and dear, because that type of community, that's where I feel like the plant-based community is also, it's a very special place, because people are here, and people who do the work we do have a different philosophy of life and mission, and it's here for true healing and connection. And so yes, absolutely, what a wonderful place that she's created and allowed others to connect and build even more community outside of even that world, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I am happy to share my story. I'm happy to talk to patients or other practitioners. I'm in the healthcare world. I work for a big healthcare network out in Jersey, and I've shared my story in grand rounds and talked to practitioners and physicians all across, my organization. But in general, I'm happy to share whatever you think is helpful for people, because I'm passionate about it.
Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed that video. Before you go though, please hit the subscribe button and the alert button so you will be notified whenever we upload any new videos. On Monday, we upload the Healthy Human Revolution podcast. Now, if you'd rather listen to the podcast, you can find it on all the major platforms, such as iTunes, Google Play, SoundCloud, and even Spotify. Now, if you're looking for more resources on how to start a plant-based diet, sustain a plant-based diet, exercise, recipes, anything regarding wellness, we've got you covered. Check out healthyhumanrevolution.com. And again, thanks for watching.